Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Let's talk about Crichton again because I really like talking about Crichton, and I read a lot of his books, and I still get to every now and then read one that I haven't read before. Westworld. This was a show that came out on HBO, 2016. For a while there, I feel like, at least within my circle of acquaintances, it was kind of inescapable. It was, I guess, kind of in the middle of Game of Thrones, but it filled a different niche, scratched a different itch. But when it was on, people were ranting and raving about it. At least in that first season, I never watched it. From what I understand, it dropped off significantly in the second season. But this is a show that was based on a concept Michael Crichton originally wrote. In fact, he wrote this screenplay in his early 30s, and it got made into a movie when he was 31 years old. He was born in 42. This movie came out in 73, and for having a budget of a little over $1 million, I think 1.25 million, it did well at the box office. It got a good response out of people when it came out that year. I mentioned this at the end of my Jurassic Park video from last week when I reread Jurassic Park for the first time in forever, because I was familiar with the concept of Westworld. I knew that it was a Crichton property, and after rereading Jurassic Park and then pondering on timeline, I realized that there was a certain idea that Crichton kept coming back to, not in terms of a philosophical or a scientific concept, but just a story construct, a mechanism, a device for creating an idea. And he developed this at least 3 times, with the most famous and successful example being Jurassic Park itself. But the concept of Westworld is that in the future there's an amusement park with 3 different sectors. The park itself is just called Delos. And the sectors are Wild West themed, medieval themed, and ancient Rome themed. Obviously, you got to pin these things down to a particular year. The Wild West one was like 1880. The medieval one was 1320 something, and the Roman one was Pompeii. But it gives you a general flavor. It wasn't there so much to reenact historical narratives as much as it was to establish an atmosphere in which rich tourists could show up and play out fantasies of theirs. Like you get to LARP, you get to act along with the setting. Only instead of being surrounded by human actors the way you might when you go to Disneyland and you meet Donald Duck or whatever, these were all very advanced robots. Human robots, animal robots, etc. And they were programmed to act a certain way. The main 2 characters, Martin and Blaine, they get to go to Westworld, and, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Crichton didn't write this as a novel. He wrote it as a screenplay, and it was later released in print with a foreword that talked about the challenges of producing the film, technical, financial, scheduling-wise, studio interference, investor concerns, and so on. And I find the making of any movie to be a fascinating tale on its own. But he talked about the hurdles of creating this particular movie. And then the rest of the print edition is just the screenplay. And if you ever get your hands on this, just be prepared to read the words "cut to" a lot, because this is written beat by beat, cut to this, cut to that. It's almost like they storyboarded it, but with words instead of images. Now, I've tried for years to keep an eye out for a somewhat inexpensive copy of this just to add it to my library, but it rarely comes up for sale at an affordable price. There was a first edition in 73, a second edition in 74, and then so far as I understand, it never went back into circulation, which surprises me, especially with the success of the show back in 2016. If you look on eBay, the cheapest copy I could find with shipping would have been $30 or $40 for a book that's around 100, 120 pages maybe, with other rarer editions, especially first editions, clearing $60 or $70 or in one case $100. So I was never able to get my hands on it until recently when, through the kindness of strangers, as it were, me being just a humble trucker blessed with many friends, I was able to read this book and read this script for the 1973 movie starring Yul Brynner. So the main two characters, like I said, they're two human guys. Last names are Martin and Blaine. Blaine's been there before to Westworld, but it's Martin's first time. And they go there, and Martin's kind of getting a feel for it. You got to dress a certain way, and then you go into Westworld, and you walk into a saloon and order a drink. You know, you can't order anything fancy vodka. This is the Wild West. You get whiskey, and that's it. And you can meet some saloon wenches and other character robot actors. But there's also this one particular character dressed in black, the gunslinger, played by Western actor Yul Brynner, who is programmed to just walk around and start crap with people, start shootouts, start fights. And you shoot him one day and the robot will die, and then the next day he'll come and find you again. And he'll just keep starting beef with you there, so you'll have an excuse to draw your gun, which can't be fired at humans, but can be fired at robots. And you get to reenact the life of a shootist in the Wild West. In the 70s, the bill was $1,000 a day to do this. So there's the amusement park aspect, and he wrote that amusement park aspect into Jurassic Park, and it came into play in Timeline. And then also, similar to Jurassic Park, things kind of got out of control, but there wasn't so much of a philosophical and scientific explanation as to why. These were just advanced robots. They started breaking down. Maybe it was a computer virus, maybe it was some kind of contagion. There was a little bit of hand-wavium on there. And for the story's purposes, it mattered less how it happened and more that it happened. And the robots started to not necessarily malfunction in the sense that they broke down, but they started to rebel against their programming. And this became apparent over in medieval world when a guy who was, a tourist who was there dressed as a knight tried to have sex with a female, I can't remember, like what was her job? Like just tavern wench or something? He tried to put the moves on her, and she resisted his advances. And the robots aren't programmed to do that. And that was when the guys in the control room who controlled Rome world and Westworld and medieval world realized that something was going wrong. And much like Dennis Nedry did in Jurassic Park, they shut the power down, just tried to turn it off and turn it back on again. But oops, this place was designed extremely poorly. And with the power off, they couldn't send a computer signal to turn the power back on. And it also shut off life support. And the room was locked. And the air conditioning shut off. And all of the control room people died. Meanwhile, the robots ran on battery power and had about 12 hours to keep doing what they do. And this includes the gunslinger, whose job is to go around starting fights and shooting people. Anyway, it goes a little bit awry from there. And the story kind of boils down to Martin trying to escape and survive against the gunslinger, as other patrons are escaping the park and the robots are going wild, giving in to the basest tendencies of their programming, or rebelling against it if they so choose to. The reason I mention philosophy is that there's not really a whole lot of philosophy going on here. It's not about like, the robots will rise up against their abusers even the way that a human would, blah, blah, blah. It's just, the idea is an amusement park goes wrong. And this is more involved than Disneyland having a roller coaster that won't run. It's, the amusement park attraction is robots that interact with people, but it goes wrong and people start dying. This is obviously, like I said, an idea that still kind of tickled Crichton's imagination. And when he started mixing it with the idea of genetics and dinosaur resurrection, I imagine that in his late 40s, he's like, hey, that idea that I had in my early 30s that made it into the theaters and made a good amount of money, I could do that again. And you got to remember, this is a time, he made that movie before VHS was a thing. If you saw a movie, you saw a movie. If you didn't see a movie, that was it. You missed it. There was no home recording or anything. That didn't come around until the very late 80s. right around the time that he was writing and getting ready to publish Jurassic Park. I got to think that that factored into his decision to write the book. Says, well, why don't I take this old idea that I already had, but I can apply it to this other idea that I've got, and I can explore some of the same themes, but instead of robots catching a virus and rebelling against their programming, it can be about trying to harness and control life and the hubris that comes with that, and utterly failing at it because life will do whatever it wants to do. And he brought in the character of Ian Malcolm, the chaotician, to explain all of this. It was a different angle to the same question, the same idea. Obviously, the execution on Jurassic Park was much better, and he gets a lot more room to play having a 400-page novel versus a 100-something page script. You can let certain ideas breathe. You can have some monologues that explain a little bit more. You really get to flesh out an idea more in the novel format. And he nailed it with that 5-star book that was Jurassic Park. Like nothing that anybody else had ever read, provided that they hadn't seen Westworld 17 years before that. With Timeline, there was, as I mentioned in my Jurassic Park video, there was a little bit of this idea, but not a whole lot. You had a jerk CEO named, I believe, Bob Doniger, who was a lot similar to the jerk CEO John Hammond in Jurassic Park, who was burning through cash to develop a highly advanced technology which he might then use for various applications. I mean, time travel would have a lot of benefits to it. But his main thing was to milk money out of people who might use it for entertainment purposes and do recreational time travel in addition to studying history and such. Like explaining to the crew that he wanted to send back, like, imagine going and studying history right at the source and answering questions. Timeline had a lot of different things to say and a lot of different questions to ask, but that underlying element was still there in some form. In the end, I'm not surprised that a mind as brilliant as Michael Crichton's decided to tread the same ground a couple of times. It's not a problem because it's not like he was plagiarizing himself or abusing his audience by just hashing the same thing over and over, do a find and replace and say, okay, we're going to remove cowboy robots and insert dinosaur clones and have it all come to the same thing. There was more profundity to it than that. He was exploring something a little bit more substantive. But when you're in your early 30s and you develop an idea versus you're in your late 40s and you've got that much more life experience and you're especially as intelligent and as versatile as Michael Crichton was, I'm not surprised that you would want to say, okay, I had this really good idea back then. I could do it even better now, and I'll do it in a very different way, and I'll redefine sci-fi as we know it. He just happened to do that. If you somehow, someday, ever get a chance to read this book along with behind-the-scenes stuff about the making of the Westworld movie, give it a shot. I might track down a DVD or a streaming copy of the 73 show, or a 73 movie. I'm not interested in watching the HBO show. I've heard too much about what the content is in there, and from what I understand, they're not following the script at all. It's just a series adaptation of that idea, but they made some changes to it, which, again, I've heard that the first season was really good, and from there it just kind of drags on. I don't know. But this is cool, and I'm glad that I got to read it and just fill in yet another gap that I didn't know existed in my ongoing education and consumption of Michael Crichton's bibliography. Thanks for watching. Drive safe. See you out there.